crooked. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So we'll check the sound. And the light needs to go on this side. Okay. Again, we're up with that light thing. So, here we are. I'm going to test the sound here. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about today, about moving the camera in. Crank it out. That's cool. So let's talk a little bit today about why I do this. Turns out that what we're really talking about here is the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is what you learn in school. Wisdom, it's what you've learned and applied that knowledge. So, if we look at my life, if I look at my life, what I can say about it is I've kind of had like a Forrest Gump life. And I'm sure many of you have seen the movie if you're not too millennial. And it followed a person's life who started out wearing braces and on his legs and became a football star, went to Vietnam, became an entrepreneur, became a runner, had all these life experiences. I've had similar life experiences. So the reason why I do this is because of my own life experience. I was adopted at 5. My mother remarried, and part of the contract for that marriage is that he had to adopt me. Well, he didn't like me, and he was very different. In fact, he was half Native American, Blackfoot Indian, and had been raised in a very rough situation, and has had his, there was a lot of sexual abuse, there was a lot of ritual abuse, and so he passed it on. And many times, I'll get into this later, but later YouTube, but we're getting into the subconscious belief system and how that affects us. So, I'm going to take my glasses off because they're reflecting. So, as we begin to look at this Forrest Gump idea, I always had vision problems. And so he was a pretty bright guy, and as he raised me, he had 6 other children, so I was the left out, and I had a younger sister who was very bright. She skipped 2 grade school grades, and so because my last name, my adopted name was Zinn, Z-I-N-N, I had to sit in the back of the room. And unbeknownst to me, I had vision problems, which means that your eyes don't track together. In other words, my right eye is doing something different than my left. So when I read across the page, my right eye passes my left one up, my left eye passes my right one up, and I transpose letters and numbers. And when I go to the next line, sometimes I'll skip two instead of one, so nothing made sense. So they didn't, at that time, optometry hadn't come along enough to recognize how to fix that. So they just simply gave me glasses and it didn't work. And in the last 20 years, 15 years or so, they began to use what they call vision therapy, which is to actually have you do eye exercises that strengthen the right eye in my case, and it helps you focus. So as things progressed, I was not doing well in school, and I was being so badly abused at home. Now, sometimes people talk about abuse, and they say, well, my dad yelled at me. That's not abuse. I'm talking about tying your feet together, throwing you out the second story window head first, beating you until you're unconscious, that kind of thing. So, and I had PTSD from age 15. So, because of other things that I won't get into at this point. But my second grade teacher wrote my mother and said that I was shaking so bad that things were falling off my desk in class. So that's kind of the history. Now, when we get into how you're shaped as a child, 70% of your belief system is formed by the time you're 7. My stepfather went on to introduce me as his retarded son. I had a D average all the way through high school. And at 10 years old, I had rheumatic fever. And I went to the doctor. I was in bed for months. And I was told that I would never ride a bike or run, that I was pretty much not going to be an athlete, so on and so forth. Well, I've never been a person who believed in that. And so at 19, first at 18, I left the house. And I went into the Marine Corps at the next year. And in the interim, I had gone into football when I was very skinny when I was a kid. And my freshman year, I went out for high school football, and I was so skinny, it was about 100 pounds, that my shoulder kept falling through the neck hole of shoulder pads. So between freshman year and senior year, I put on about 60 pounds. And I lifted weights every day, every other day, worked out, did 100 sit-ups a night, 100 push-ups a night, and went into the Marine Corps, and I got all this special duty. And the first assignment I had was the equivalent of embassy duty. They chose you on a boot camp, and due to your physical fitness scores and your IQ. I didn't know that at the time. I figured I was just lucky. But as I was getting out, and I did that for a period of time. That was my first assignment. And I was actually on the Marine security detail that kept the Admiral of the First Fleet safe and the captain of the ship, the flagship for the First Fleet, and security for the ship. So I went on and had an injury, and I had to have my ankle screwed together, and with a bone flap and some tendons screwed down. So I missed the ship's deployment, and I became a weapons instructor. First I was on the gate at Camp Pendleton, and then I was a weapons instructor. And I was one of the top 2 weapons instructors in the Marine Corps. And I was getting out. When you go in the Marine Corps at that time, it was very different than it is today. Boot camp was 16 weeks long. Now it's 8 weeks. And after that, you go into infantry training. So I went into infantry training and then I got into weapons instructing, and I was one of the top 2 weapons instructors in the Marine Corps. And as I was getting out, was being discharged, the gunnery sergeant was trying to re-enlist me, promised me the moon. And I said, why are you promising me all these things? He said, well, you're the top weapons instructor, one of the top 2 in the Marine Corps, and you had the highest physical fitness score and the highest IQ in your platoon. Well, I was up against semi-pro football players and real athletes that were quite astute at their craft. Well, I realized that I had the highest physical fitness score. So I got out of the Marine Corps and I got a job in science and metals, and eventually went to school, remember I had a D average in high school. So I went to junior college on probation. I went to the best junior college in the nation, scholastically. And I finished a degree in metallurgy, got a job first in the metallurgical research as a technician, and then as an analyst, and graduated into Astor Nuclear Research Lab, and then into McDonnell Douglas, where we did the Apollo program, and we built one of the stages for the Apollo program. And we worked with the astronauts. We built fighter planes, we built airliners, and so on and so forth. And during that period of time, I stayed in school, and I was told that I would be a good geologist. Well, it turns out my advisor in college was a geologist. And I took 4 years of geological oceanography. I was in my senior year, second semester, and I realized I do not want to do this. I'd done all the math and all the physics and all the chemistry and all the geology courses, and I realized this is not what I want to do. So this is one of the reasons I'm doing the career thing I'm doing, the Authentic Self-Guide. So I went, I finished a degree, a certificate in social ecology. I used the geology background. And then I got into, I had an experience with the spirit, and it scared the doo-doo out of me. So I when I got into psychology, it was just fun and easy for me. And I finished a bachelor's degree, and then I went into a master's program, and then into a doctoral program. I finished my doctorate with one of the top Jungian psychologists in the world, and wrote a book on a type of therapy that can actually work with the subconscious belief system and change it. And I got out, and I've been in practice for just about 30 years now. And in the interim, I tried out, I was on the rowing team in college, and we were a really good team. We were beating all the USC and UCLA and Stanford and Berkeley and all that. And so I went to the Olympic development camp at the end of the first year, and then tried out for the Olympics after the second year. And I was invited to the trials, and I did it, but I was cut on the second cut after the first round, actually. And so part of it was because I only weighed 160 pounds. And I was competing against guys that were 6'8", 6'6", and outweighed me by 80 pounds or so. And so I was actually qualified as a lightweight, which is 155 pounds or less. So the next year I competed as a lightweight internationally. I also, after that, became a lifeguard competed in the nationals for a 3-mile open ocean swim, took fourth in that, competed in outrigger canoes, in kayaking, and in surf skis, took gold, bronze, silver medals. And so the story behind this is what I want to get through to you. And that is, your subconscious belief system controls you 90 to 95% of the time. So if you're programmed to believe that you're a failure or you're a victim, get into victim consciousness, you're stuck. There are several times when that belief system is challenged. And we can give an example. When I was a lifeguard, when you go out to save somebody in the ocean and they're drowning, their tendency is to try to wrap their arms and legs around you because their belief system is they have to get something that floats, which is you. And so as a lifeguard, you're trained to hit them in the face, smack them right in the nose with your fist, because it wakes them up and shocks them out of that subconscious belief system. And the same way my next door neighbor was talking to me the other day about his experience in Vietnam. He said it snapped me out of my belief system. He said I went in as a Lutheran good boy, smart kid, and I realized when I got to Vietnam, number one, we weren't there for the purpose we were said to be there. The Vietnamese hated us, and we were giving our lives for somebody that didn't even care. So sometimes that belief system is challenged. In my particular case, it was the Marine Corps when I realized that I had the highest physical fitness score after having rheumatic fever and told I would never run or ride a bike, and the highest IQ. Even though I had gotten a D average because I sat in the back of the room and I was an auditory learner. So I couldn't hear and I couldn't see, so life didn't make sense to me. And I had that subconscious belief system from my stepfather that said I was retarded and introduced me as such. So this is why I developed the Authentic Self Guide. Now there's other reasons as well, because if you ask any mother that's had more than one child, they would tell you that the child is born with very different personalities and temperaments and so on, and gifts. So what I decided to do, when I went into psychology, I realized that psychology and medicine were based on illness. They were based on fixing illness, or in medical terms, cut it out, give you the magic pill. And there's reasons for that, which I'll get into in other YouTubes. In psychology, you were studying illness, and they had a big book, they still do, called the DSM-5. I've morphed into DSM-6, but it's basically a diagnosis book. You look up these symptoms the person has, and you give them a diagnosis, because the insurance companies will then pay you if you give them an illness diagnosis. There are several problems with that. And my perception was that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And I wanted to study wellness. So when I came back from international competition, I realized that I was not happy. And that I'd accomplished all these things, but I wasn't happy. I'd worked on the NASA project, I tried out for the Olympics, and so I started looking, I read Abraham Maslow's book, The Psychology of Being, and I started looking at the whole concept of wellness and happiness. And so I started, the other thing I should tell you about myself and others is that we take in information totally different from everybody else. Everybody has a unique set of tools that they take in information with. Because I had vision problems, I took information auditorily and then kinesthetically and lastly visually. And when I get into the Authentic Self Guide and give you examples, I'll show you what that looks like. So, being a kinesthetic learner, I started having happy people parties, where I just invited all the happy people I'd ever met and turned them on to each other. And started watching what happened. It's very interesting. At that point, I didn't realize the difference between happiness and joy, which was a later development. And it's a significant difference because happiness is based on getting what your ego wants. Joy, you can be in the worst situation in the world and still have joy. And there was a guy in the prison camps in Germany, and he wrote a book about maintaining that joy. So I decided that I wanted to do a doctorate in wellness. So because I'd had an experience with a spirit, I wanted to study what was out there, because I had been raised in this NASA environment, and if you couldn't touch it and feel it, measure it, it didn't exist. Well, then this spirit shows up at the end of my bed, and I said, hey, wait a minute, there's something else here. So I went into my master's degree, I went into what they call Transpersonal Psychology, which is a study of Eastern and Western psychology and philosophy and religion. So we studied Buddha, and we studied all the philosophers, Plato, Socrates, and as well as the Eastern ones. And I think a lot of times Western psychology and Western thought tends to eliminate the incredible things that the East has brought us, like acupuncture, homeopathic medicine, and all that. They were way ahead of the Western society up until probably the 16th century. And so we studied across the board who had brought what in, what the philosophers said, what the psychologists said, and it was a very different experience. And so one of my heroes, and one of the people I felt was the most significant in the field of psychology, was Carl Jung, J-U-N-G. And for those of you who like to learn, you might look him up on YouTube or on Amazon, some of his books. And so I became, I did my doctorate with the former president of the Carl Jung Association in the United States, and learned about, now I also want to get into what that school, the first graduate school for it was. It was called a free school. Now I've always thought outside the box, and because I never took like the medical doctor's analysis when I was 10 as fact, I was able to change that. And so what I did was, so what this was called a free school. It doesn't mean it's free, because it's probably more expensive than a private school or some of the other major universities. But what a free school is they let you learn what you wanted to learn. In other words, at the beginning of every semester or quarter, the students would all get together and have sticky notes, and they would put them on this long wall, a hallway, and they would put out their ideas, and the professors would come along and arrange them in general terms, and they would say, okay, I'll teach that class. So we got to learn things that people hadn't even explored yet. And it was an extraordinary school. And then for my doctorate, I went to a place called International College, which is another free school. And I wanted to study wellness, spiritual psychology, and I must explain, for those of you who are put off by the word God or spirituality, there's a difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is a corporation. They're there to collect money. They're there to make rules. That's why I eat fish on Friday. And starting from a Catholic as a young kid, I really challenge that. That didn't make sense to me at all. So we had professors like Buckminster Fuller who invented the geodesic dome, and Virginia Satir, and just amazing, amazing people who were cutting edge folks. And of course the guy I did my doctorate with was cutting edge as well. He had started I must explain that Carl Jung put a lot of emphasis on dreams. He believed that dreams were like the dipstick in your car. Now, a lot of millennials and women don't know what a dipstick does, but if you take the dipstick out of your car, and there's chunks of metal on that in the oil, your whole engine's falling apart. If the oil is low, you have to put oil in there or it's going to blow up. Well, the same thing with dreams. So he had started a place called the Center for the Healing Arts in Los Angeles, and he was studying cancer patients. And he had oncologists and he had Jungian psychologists working together. And he wanted to see if in fact there were dreams that were precursors to cancer. And he did find that there was, which is a whole other YouTube. However, so I wanted to see what it was that transformed people's lives. Now, one of the ways that I could explain transformation is the epiphany I had when I was getting out of the Marine Corps and was told I had the highest IQ and the highest physical fitness score. Well, all of a sudden it shook my subconscious belief system up. And I said, I can do anything. And so what we framed that as is transformational psychology. How does a person transform their lives from their subconscious belief system, running them 90 to 95% of the time? I'm going to give a short, I'm going to go complete YouTube on the belief system, subconscious belief system. But the subconscious belief system is part of the unconscious. And Carl Jung said, the unconscious is unconscious, otherwise they'd call it something else. So you don't really understand what's going on there, but it runs you. Now there's good news and bad news with that. The good news is that you couldn't drive a car without the subconscious, because it does things for you. It also controls your breathing, your heart rate, your circadian rhythm, all those wonderful things. But when you're going through childhood, between birth and 7, you're in a brain state. Well, there's 4 major brain states: alpha, beta, theta, delta. You're in delta or theta, one of the two, which is the same type of brain state that you get into when you're in meditation, or and what it is basically you're seeing things as if everything is real. So how would this affect you? Say you came from, like I did, from a background where your stepfather is beating your mother and the kids and knocking you out and throwing you out the 2nd-story window, and well, first of all, you can't recognize, you've never been taught who's safe and who isn't. And that comes into the issue of boundaries. The second thing is you start believing what your parents say about you and your teachers. Now when I was in graduate school, we were learning about the child psychology. We read a book called The Magical Child. And The Magical Child was by Joseph Clayton Pierce. And what it talked about is that each child is born with these magical gifts, and that the school system and their parents tend to take it away from them by the school system in particular. So think about what happened to you between birth and 7. Well, first of all, you've got your childhood. Now, in our country, we farm out our children to preschool, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, between birth and 7. Well, when we look at what happened to our school system, we can begin to understand why we act the way we do. In 1903, we were the most productive and creative country in the world. In 1903, the Rockefeller Foundation came in, and they redesigned the school system. They redesigned it to create factory workers, because it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And my perception is they wanted us to be subservient, because a teacher is the ultimate authority. You're not allowed to think outside the box. You have to color inside the lines, so on and so forth. So we were number 1 in the world in 1903. Now we're number 53rd. 53. Look it up on YouTube, or look it up on Google. But sometimes it varies between 23rd and 53rd. But our school system is abysmal. And now, with the age of artificial intelligence, if you go into a factory, it's all robots. So those factory workers they trained us to be are now being replaced by robots and artificial intelligence. So there is our school system. So I began to look at this and say, there's something wrong here. And so I designed, when I got into transformational psychology, I realized I had epiphanies along the way. And many times people have a wake-up call. They realize all this stuff they've been telling us is not true. For instance, as a veteran in Vietnam, there was about 1965, there was an incident called the Bay of Tonkin. You can look this up on YouTube or in the history books. And one of the best and realistic history books that hasn't been redesigned. I have it here. It's called the Untold History of the United States by Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone was a famous, or still is, a famous movie producer, wrote and directed the movie Platoon. If you ever want to see a realistic movie, what Vietnam was like. And it talks about the Bay of Tonkin. The Bay of Tonkin was, there was a ship called the Maddox. It was a destroyer, and it was in the Bay of Tonkin, which is in international, not in international waters. It's not in international waters. And they said that during a rainstorm, that these 3 North Vietnamese PT boats, which are torpedo boats, attacked it. Well, like I said, I was part of the security detail for the Admiral of the First Fleet, and the other Marines that I trained with that did similar things were on the aircraft carriers that were flying air support for those people. So as soon as they reported that, these airplanes, these jets took off from this aircraft carrier, and there was no PT boats. And at the time we had a Secretary of State named McNamara, and he declared that he went to war with that. He basically started bombing North Vietnam at that point. And as a consequence, we lost 58,000 people, men. Wiped out a whole generation of people. And when I say we lost 58,000, that's how many were killed. That's not counting the wounded and the crippling effects of war, PTSD, and diseases that they came back with, malaria and being exposed to Agent Orange, which is defoliant that attacks the nervous system and causes birth defects and cancer. it wiped out a whole 10-year generation of men. We didn't have a choice. There was a draft. And one of the tragedies, real tragedies, is that after these guys went over there and were killed and were exposed to PTSD and these neurotoxins, and came back wounded and tragically mentally affected, there was a protest against the war, and these men were hated by the civilians that never went. They were discriminated against, and they didn't even volunteer for this. So this is one of the tragedies that has occurred over and over and over. We are in our, I don't know, 13th, 14th year in Afghanistan. We're also in Iraq. We're still there. And all this is about is money. I play the game follow the money. And later in McNamara's life, he admitted, it's on YouTube, that the Bay of Tonkin never happened. So here we have things like that happening. So this affects our whole society, and nobody talks about it. Nobody challenges it. So how do we have a transformational experience? Well, one of my next door neighbors was talking about how that transformed his life. He realized that this whole religion he was brought up in, and the whole patriotism he was brought up in, because his father and his grandfather had been in World War I and World War II in Korea, that he was raised to believe that you're in this country, you're supposed to protect it. So he had that epiphany. That's a transformation. My transformation was learning that I had the highest physical fitness score and the highest IQ. So some people have that turning point in their life, that transformational moment. Perhaps you have. Perhaps you've seen something that said, you know, the stuff that they're telling us is not necessarily true. We have to question it. That's a transformational moment. At that point, we can challenge the belief system. When you're drowning, somebody hits you in the face, you're shocked out of that belief system. You wake up. I've heard friends of mine talk about when you go into a combat operation, all of a sudden your vision opens up, your hearing opens up, all your senses open. You can feel things on your skin that you couldn't do otherwise. So this is a transformational moment. What I want to do and so what I did is I created the Authentic Self Guide. And I spoke about that when a mother has more than one child, they will tell you that children are born with very different personalities and temperaments and gifts and intelligences. So I created an Authentic Self Guide. You could say I used to call it the owner's manual, because you have an owner's manual for your car, your refrigerator, your motorcycle. You don't have one for you. And recently, I have a Esquire magazine. I don't subscribe to it, but I noticed it the other day. And on the cover of it is an article that says this young kid's graduating from high school, just graduating from high school. And he says, I know everything that's wrong with me. I don't know what's right with me. So what if somebody gave you a complete owner's manual that told you what's right with you and how to use it, how to design your life around it, how to find a career that fits it? Well, that's what an Authentic Self Guide is. So this is an opportunity. And by the way, this is not a mass production thing. Now, when I started marketing this as a doctor, a lot of people came up to me and said, you need to mass produce this. You need to get an algorithm and do this. Well, each one of these is handcrafted. Now, for those of you who ski or have certain sports that I surf and kayak, so you find out that there's a big difference. And when I tried out for the Olympics, we had a boat that was handcrafted. And it made all the difference in the world. There's a difference between something that's mass-produced and something that's custom-made for you. If you ever had a pair of shoes, or cowboy boots are a major example, you talk to people from Texas or down south and they're wearing cowboy boots, or up in Sacramento, they're the most comfortable things they can make because they're custom-made. They fit to your feet. They wouldn't trade those boots in for anything. You could buy $200 shoes and they don't compare to custom-made boots. This is a custom-made thing. Each one of these is handcrafted, specifically for you. There's no two alike, not even close. So that's what the authentic self is. That's my invention, and each one is custom designed for a person. It takes a while to produce it, and I would encourage you, because you can't buy this anywhere else, and I would encourage you to go online to my website, which is AuthenticSelfPath.com. And the reason I named it that was because each one of us has a different path to follow. And I believe that we come into this lifetime, and this is just my perception, that we come into this lifetime to do certain things. And there's a book called The Life You're Meant to Live by a friend of mine. And I think that really is apropos. What are you here to do? What's the life that you're meant to live? That's what the Authentic Self Guide is. It's a roadmap. It's an owner's manual for all your gifts. What's unique about you? What nourishes you? What burns you out? So what to do and what not to do. And it gets into things like your circadian rhythm. When do you sleep best? When do you work best? When do you play best? Now, I've always been more of an afternoon and night person. Some people were 5 o'clock in the morning. When I tried out for the Olympics, we had to get up at 5:30, be on the water at 6. I was there, but my brain wasn't. I never take a patient before 10 o'clock in the morning because my brain isn't there yet. It's a good time to come up and get up and do your meditation, your prayers, to eat, to do a little exercise, but not to have all the oars in the water, as they say. And so when I was in college, we would work out till 6 to 8, and then I would go to work at McDonnell Douglas and work in the metallurgical research lab, and then I would get off about 2, go to class, and I'd start going to classes then. I would take classes until the evening, and then I go to the library till midnight, because that's when I learned best. Now, when we get to the education system, this is something that's really important. Isn't it interesting that our school system never taught you how to learn? They simply threw you in the deep end. If you sat in the back of the room, you had vision problems, you were dead. If you learned by doing, now one of the things that I started the story about when I was in graduate school, I wanted to, because I was a kinesthetic learner, an auditory learner, I wanted to see the belief system happen. They talked about the subconscious belief system happening between birth and 70% of it. So I wanted to watch that happen, so I went and taught preschool. Well, what happened was that I got all the problem kids. Most of them were kinesthetic learners. And what I found out about the school system, I was also trained as a teacher, by the way. I taught college, and so I taught preschool for a year. And what I realized realized at that time there was a whole theory in psychology called running therapy. And basically what it said was that you could run with a person or walk with them, and they would learn because they were moving. Well, what I measure is how much auditory, facial, and kinesthetic you are. So these kids were all kinesthetics. They were being put on Ritalin. And one of the things I found interesting about the school system is that the teacher at the end of every year would write a report about who this kid was, what his gifts were, what was wrong with him, what was right with him. And they passed it on to the next teacher that was going to teach the next class the next year. So the teacher the next year already had a preconceived idea who that kid was. He was already pigeonholed before she even saw him. So you can see how this progressed and discriminated against people like for kinesthetic learners. So what I did was I started a running class. And so these little kids would have tennis shoes about this big, and we'd go for runs. And we would learn to count by kicking the can. We would talk, we would learn things by moving. So nowadays, when I started my practice, if a person was high kinesthetic, I'd take them on a walk because they would learn. There's interesting stories about this. I had a friend of mine who's a physical therapist, and there's physical therapists who have a master's degree, and there's a new field that has a doctorate degree. This guy has a doctorate, so he's really well versed. And so I was seeing him the other day, and he said, you know, we were talking about it. I told him a joke a year ago. He said, oh, I remember that joke. And he said, you know, it's an interesting thing. He said, if I wasn't working on you when you told me that joke, I wouldn't remember it. Because he's a kinesthetic learner. Take a look at professions that move for a living. Surgeons, physical therapists, those kind of PE teachers. They learn by doing because they're kinesthetic learners. Isn't that fascinating? And yet the school system does not allow that. You sit in straight rows, keep your mouth shut, speak when spoken to. And so one of the things I'm doing right now is getting this into the school system, because I want to start when that belief system is still happening and let a kid know what their actual gifts are, what makes them special, so they're not discriminated against. And they have a little owner's manual for who they are. And as they grow, we add to it. So you can imagine the fields that are wide open to this. For instance, as a former Marine, all these guys that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, getting out of the service, getting out of the Navy and the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force, they have no idea what to do with their life. They've been in a military situation where they're following orders all the time. They don't think for themselves unless they're in certain fields like intelligence or so on. And imagine what would happen to these people, for instance, combat veterans and Special Forces and Navy SEALs. I know I have several friends that are Navy SEALs and a lot of Marine friends and Green Beret friends. And these guys know a lot about being on the field and surviving in the field and living off the land and killing. They don't know how to apply that to civilian life. So when they come back, they're lost. They have to work for a security thing. They have to hire out as a contractor for the military or the CIA. What would happen if they had an authentic self guide? If they had an owner's manual? Said, okay, go to school for this. This is what you're going to end up doing. This is your life you're meant to live. Think how that would make a difference in the world. So the school system, the military, the veterans, going into drug rehab centers. Here's people who've had an epiphany. It's that they're hooked on drugs. what would happen if they had an authentic self-guide, an owner's manual for what to do with their lives? Many times the reason they're drinking or on drugs is because they're failing in the system that's set up for them. Let's open up another idea. What about seniors in high school going to college? Now, can give you some examples. I think it makes a talk more interesting to give examples. I had a kid that came in, and he was at a school up north, and his parents, his father and his grandfather, were engineers, astronomical engineers, which is this is the toughest engineering. I was in civil engineering and geological oceanography for a long time, for 4 years. But this is the top. This is where the cream of the crop goes. Well, he was bright. He was off the scale. He always, all the way through high school, he was taking advanced classes. He was taking college courses by the time he was a junior or senior. And he went up to school and he started flunking out. And he got into drugs. And so his mother came in and brought him in, and he'd been in college for 2 years. And it was a very good school. And he had put his fist through the wall, so he had a broken hand. And so I did an authentic self-guide with him. Turns out he's really bright, but engineering is not his passion. So he changed majors his junior year, got out of engineering, and got into pre-law. He's been on the dean's list for four quarters. That's a shift. So he's flunking out. They were actually going to kick him out. And so that shift in consciousness, knowing what his gifts really were, what nourished him, what burned him out, what his circadian rhythm was, changed his life. Another thing that's coming up with the advent of cell phones and computers is that people's attention span have gotten shorter and shorter. I had a young girl come in, she was probably a freshman in high school, and bright, on the honors roll, accelerated classes, the whole thing, but she was having some problems. So I tested her concentration. Now, one of the things we're never taught is how to concentrate. So she had I timed her, and she had a 5-second concentration gap. So she could concentrate on something for 5 seconds. That's about the same as a fruit fly or goldfish. That's what our kids are going through right now. With all these cell phones, with all these computers, and the advertising is set up for, if you do an interview on a radio station or TV station, they give you a time that you have to talk. It's a sound bit. It's called a sound bit. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. That's because people's attention span have gotten so bad. So one of the things to do is to teach kids how to learn, how to concentrate, what their gifts are, what nourishes them, and how they take in information, what their circadian rhythm is. So we spoke about earlier about our school system being 53rd in the world. So one of the things I always look at is who's doing well. Now, our society tends to try to fix it by creating new things, in particular our school system. And so they keep failing worse and worse and worse, and they get political. Politics comes in. So we have the No Child Left Behind. Well, that makes everybody stupid. Think about that. That was George Bush's idea. So I looked at the best in the world. Turns out it's Finland. What's different about the school system in Finland? I should go research this. By the way, don't take my word for it. Go research this stuff. Look on Google, look on YouTube. The most effective school system in the world is Finland. They have the highest grades, the highest success rate. What's different about Finland? Well, first of all, they don't start school until 7. We just talked about the subconscious belief system being formed 70% by the time you're 7. So the mother stays home with the child, bonds with the child, the parents bond with the child, they teach them social skills, they teach them how to interact with other kids, and they start school. Another interesting thing is there's less than 1 hour homework, most of the time no homework. Another thing is they only go to school for 4 hours a day. Recess is an hour and a half. Why? Because they're experiencing things kinesthetically. They're learning by doing. They design their own playgrounds. So we have to take a look at what works already and custom design it for us. They go by the kids' passions. They follow the kids' passions. The teachers are not the ultimate authority. They're a mentor. They have smaller classrooms. So this is some of the things I look at, and some of the reasons that I'm trying to affect the school system, and would love to help you by giving you your authentic self guide. Now, if you have health insurance, I take Aetna and Cigna, sometimes some other insurance, and to me, it's just worth it. So I would encourage you to go on YouTube. I'm going to start a YouTube channel to explain more about this. I know this is a little bit rambling today, but I wanted to give you an overview of why I'm doing this and who I am. So I've got a doctorate in transformational psychology. I did 2 years of graduate work in transpersonal psychology, Eastern and Western psychology for religion. I studied with the top Jungian psychologist in the world, in the nation. He was on the cutting edge. I did a degree in psychology and undergraduate work. I did a degree in metallurgy, worked on the space program. Many of you have seen the movie Apollo 13. I was one of the people who, on the research team that told them why it blew up. I got to try for the Olympics. I have a background in many, many different things. That's kind of that Forrest Gump thing. And I'm still a lifetime learner. I'm still going to school. I still learn every day. And what I learned was I love to learn. And when you find your passion, that's what happens. You love to learn. You start studying on your own. So this is why I invented the Authentic Self Guide. And I've worked with scientists who invented things and so on, and I really wanted to make a difference in the world my own way. And so the Authentic Self Guide is my way of making a difference in the world, to empower people. My real job in life is to empower people. I'm also a licensed marriage family therapist in the state of California. I'm also one of the first doctorates in psychology and wellness, which is now called positive psychology, and spiritual psychology. I also am a internationally certified career and transition life coach. And so, and it gets back to the difference between, you can listen to somebody who's read a lot of books, that's learned a lot of things, and that's knowledge. It's not wisdom. But if you've been there, if you've done it, and that's why, many times people don't understand why veterans don't talk to you about what happened in a war zone, because you couldn't possibly understand. So one of the gifts that I think is most important as a therapist, as a psychotherapist, or as a doctor, is if you've been there, if you had to do it yourself. The other thing that happened to me is 2 years after I finished my doctorate, I was hit by a bicycle. I used to ride bikes a lot. And I got hit by a drunk driver on a bicycle. And I had a traumatic brain injury. And again, I went to the national conference on traumatic brain injury, and I showed the doctor my results, my test results, my MRIs, my CAT scans, my neuropsychology scores, and he said, "You're not a psychologist anymore. You're not a doctor anymore. Go get a job as a waiter or something, because that's your life right now." Well, again, I don't believe him. I had a major, wonderful experience. I got to study with the Native American shamans. I studied alternative forms of healing. And we did that in my graduate school as well. We studied with the Native American shamans. So there's different forms of healing. There's some from the east, some from the west. I got into meditation. I got to go to Sundance. That's invitation only. I got to go in the inner circle and get a healing. And the Native Americans didn't even get to do that. The shamans picked me out. So I had these amazing experiences. And my IQ had dropped 20 points. Now, normal IQ is 110, between 90 and 110. And I was above that, and it dropped 20 points. In the process of that healing, in the process of my not believing that was my life destiny, my IQ went up higher than it was when I started. So that's an example of how your belief system can change your life. So with that, I'll quit rambling, and I appreciate your attention. Please go to the website, www.authenticselfpath.com, and check it out. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me or my assistant. And I thank you for watching.